Picture this. Imagine growing up in a quiet suburban town like I did, Westfield, New Jersey. It's the kind of place where it smells like dryer sheets, there's fresh cut grass everywhere, the streets are lined with trees, and the canopy is full green, and it is beautiful. All the lawns, not a blade of grass is out of place. Everything is trimmed perfectly. There's always kids riding their bikes until the streetlights start to come on. And I remember that amber glow was like our signal. It's time to head home so that mom doesn't kick our ass. In a place like that, your brain performs a silent, automatic calculation because we were always living in a survival mode, which was just a normal mechanism for us every day. It's a place where there's big, beautiful mansions, neighbors always waving to you from their porches, and it always whispered a single comforting lie. You're safe here. But then, this is where the story gets crazy. And I learned something about my town where I grew up that simply shocked the crap out of me. You realize that all those big, beautiful homes and mansions have secrets locked up behind their doors. One of the most disturbing family murders in that local area history happened right under our town's nose in this big grand mansion called Breeze Knoll. The man's name was John List. If you were to look at old black and white photos of him today, you would say he looks like your stereotypical suburban dad from the 1970s. He had those thick black rimmed glasses. He always wore a crisp button down short sleeve shirt tucked into his business slacks. He had a receding hairline, a jawline that definitely suggested he was the guy that followed all the rules written in the book. He was meticulously organized, always mowing his lawn in a tie before he would head to church on Sundays. He was totally, terrifyingly ordinary. And that's exactly what makes this story sit in the back of my throat like one of those big-ass horse pills that I can't swallow. Because in Westfield, in 1971, evil didn't look like a monster under our beds. It looked like the guy next door checking his mailbox. I can remember hearing about this case years and years later, watching America's Most Wanted. This was back when it was less like TV and more like a national manhunt for the criminal. The show reconstructed a look-alike clay figurehead of John List, which would sit in my brain for years to come. I never lost that image. And not because his face was hideous, but because it was so forgettable. His face you had seen at the hardware store 1,000 times over, but never looked twice. John List killed his entire family, his wife, his mother, his 3 kids. Then he cleaned up the crime scene, turned on all the lights in the house, and quietly, simply walked away. This man went on to start a whole new life somewhere else. He moved to an entirely new state. He got married again. He joined a new church. For almost 2 decades, he lived a normal life with those bodies and souls of his family that lay in the dark of that mansion. And this is where the question formed in my head that I have never been able to shake. How does someone live completely mundane life while carrying something so dark inside of them? Does that person you see at the grocery store have a closet full of secrets? Does your neighbor's ordinariness serve as a mask? Or is the mask the only thing that's real?
Look who just rolled in. It's time to butter up your ears to laughs, life, and a little flaky wisdom. It's all about the biscuits with RJ.
At All About the Biscuits, we believe life's just a big old platter of toppings. Flaky, spicy, sweet, even messy. And guess what? We butter them all up and dig right in. Whether it's real talk or ridiculous rants. I'm RJ, and we're serving it hot. All toppings, all biscuits, always served hot.
Welcome back to All About the Biscuits. Storytelling, perspective, conviction. And you know me, I'm RJ, where I love to talk to myself and hear myself talk all at the same time. Today, we're going to be digging into something much deeper than just crime headlines, whodunits. I want to talk about the architecture of the human mind. We're talking about fear. But more specifically, something I like to call controlled fear. Think about your own habits just for a second. Why are we drawn to death? Why do we spend our Friday nights binging detective shows where the ending is almost always tragic? Why do we listen to podcasts about the worst and most evil things humans can do to each other? If you ask a psychologist, they'll tell you it isn't because we love violence. I think most of us are repulsed by it. Well, the actual pain of it. The real answer is that the human brain craves structure. At least I tend to think so. We live in a world that is fundamentally full of chaos and havoc every single day. A world where bad things happen to good people for absolutely no reason at all. Our brains hate that. We hate unanswered questions. And crime stories provide us with that structure and framework. A mystery appears, and we begin to get curious as to why the pattern is broken. Our questions build up, tensions rise, and eventually the truth emerges. The why is finally explained to us. The who is caught. When fear becomes defined and we understand it, it actually becomes manageable. We often take the raw, jagged edges of reality and we sand it down so that there's a narrative. That's controlled fear. It's the thrill of the roller coaster knowing the tracks are bolted down. But think, what happens when the tracks aren't bolted down? What happens when fear is something you can't see coming? To understand why we seek out these dark stories, I have to go back to where my own relationship began with fear. And no, it didn't start with a murder. It actually started with books. Before I got into crime stories, before crime stories actually entered into my life, fear showed up in a much sooner and a quieter place. Fear didn't have a mask or any kind of weapon. It was pages full of words that wouldn't make sense or compute in my noggin. Reading comprehension was incredibly difficult for me growing up. I remember sitting in a classroom with those awful, terrible wooden desks and the smell of freaking chalk everywhere. There was always people turning pages around me when I couldn't even get past the first page. Other kids would always finish the assignments well before I did, and it made me feel completely alone. The teacher would ask a question about the plot, the characters, the story, and all hands would go up. The other kids always understood it well before me. They saw the why behind the characters. Meanwhile, I was still stuck at the beginning of the damn story, trying to figure it out, trying to put it together. My brain was working extra hard, going absolutely nowhere. That kind of fear was so subtle, yet it was heavy, especially when I was a kid. It's not the fear. The fear wasn't danger. It was the fear of being exposed and being seen. It's that feeling of someone might see me struggling. That they'll see that I have a defect when I'm trying to process everything going on in the world. When you're a kid, being different feels like being preyed on. You want to try to fit in, but you can't. You want to be normal, just like John List wanted to be normal and unseen. First, let me clarify, for totally different reasons. I remember leaving after school reading therapy one afternoon, literally like it was yesterday. The school always felt empty at that point. The hallways, they always had that eerie, quiet feeling because everybody was gone. It was just that awkward emptiness. So I walk outside to the bike rack, expecting to unlock my bike, hop on my ride, and get home. But when I saw my bike, I felt something was off. The handlebars had been twisted completely sideways, total 180 degrees. It wasn't broken. Nothing seemed to be snapped off. But I knew someone tampered and had clearly spent time loosening the bolts, turning them around, and tightening them back up. Was it a message? It was obvious that it was deliberate, but now it makes me feel even more alone. And moments like that stay with you. I had a full range of emotions for sure at that time. First there was embarrassment. Hey, is someone watching me? Then there was anger. Who would do this? Because I didn't know I had enemies. But finally, it was the fear of being vulnerable, alone, and scared. It was the realization that even when you think you're just a kid in a safe space, someone is watching you. Someone knows your schedule. Someone can reach out and touch your life whenever they wanted. But here's where we pivot. Later in life, I discovered writing. Writing for me became not just an outlet, but my resolve. When you read, you're a passenger in someone else's car. If they drive off a cliff, well, you're going over with them. But when you write, you're the one building that road. You decide where all the curves are going to be. You decide the tension and when it builds. And most importantly, like me, you decide when it ends. Writing gave me control over the very thing that used to humiliate me. Words. Now, looking back, that sense of structure, the whole range and mess of emotions, and putting them into the beginning, the middle, and the end is possibly why I eventually got hooked on crime mysteries. I wasn't just reading the story, I was watching someone else build that cage around the monster. But what happens when that monster doesn't have a face? What happens when the fear isn't just twisted handlebars, but the shadow on every highway? Years later, fear appeared again, but in a different form that it had ever before had nothing to do with books and classrooms. It was deep fear for your life. It was real. It wasn't a movie. It was the DC sniper attacks. I was living in Northern Virginia, going to school at George Mason at that time. And this affected me to this day. This wasn't controlled fear. This was a 3-week period where our daily lives were just terror. This fear wasn't just about the violence itself. It was about the unpredictability, the unknown. Usually, when we think of danger, we think of bad people, we think of late nights. We begin to create these safety boundaries so that we don't do scary things. Like, we don't walk outside real late at night because it's dark. We make sure we lock our door, sleep with one eye open. But the DC sniper changed all that. People were being shot while mowing their lawn, while pumping gas, while loading groceries into their cars, just walking into a store. Our normal became lethal. I remember pulling into a gas station and seeing something I'll never forget. Big, gigantic construction, blue and silver tarps draped over the front of the pumps. Gas stations, public transportation had all become makeshift shelters. The community was crouching down behind their cars while filling them up. Think about that for a second. You're doing something that you had done normal every day, like it was autopilot. But now, every nerve ending in your body is on high alert. You're scanning the rooftops. You're checking the tree line, the horizon. You're looking at every car that drives by to see if there's a barrel of a gun poking out of the trunk. This is where your brain is desperately trying to find a pattern. Is it a white van? The news says it's a white van, so it must be a white van. Every white work truck van in DC became a suspect in the eyes of the public. People started calling the police on every damn contractor, plumber, HVAC, delivery folks. Oh my goodness. But then all the information was wrong that the media was feeding us. Well, I guess maybe it's not a van. Maybe it's actually a sedan. Maybe there's 2 people. Maybe there's 1. Uncertainty is what creates a specific kind of gut feeling. Your brain is trying to get that pattern match going. And when the pattern is off, your brain is starting to go into overdrive. Anxiety is just the way your brain is telling you, I don't have enough information to feel safe. But then the case breaks wide open. I'm not just going to justify any of this by saying their names. The two men had been caught. Suddenly, we get the feeling of sigh because the monsters had names. They had faces. We finally had a motive. As twisted as it was, the moment those two were in handcuffs, the tarps came down. We all stopped hiding. Why? The threat was gone. But more importantly, the mystery was solved. The chaos now had a story. And now we can categorize it. We can file it away for a great day for crime and justice. The structure to our story had been restored. And we could finally breathe. And we can finally understand the why. But what do we do with the stories that never give us that ending? What do we do with the watchers who never leave the shadows? Years after the DC sniper, another strange story resurfaced that I hadn't heard in a very long time, and it brought me right back to where it all started for me in Westfield, New Jersey. It's known as the Watcher case. A young family buys their dream home, big, beautiful house on 657 Boulevard. They were so excited, they were ready to get on with their lives and get it started. Them and their two little kids. And then the first letter arrives in their mailbox. It's not a bill. It's not an advertisement. It was a handwritten letter from the Watcher. The letters were definitely freaking chilling. The Watcher claims that their family had been watching this house for decades. They knew the names of their children. Scary. They knew everything about this family, the renovations that were going on inside the house. They knew their schedule. They even asked on one of the letters if the young blood had been brought to the house yet. The family immediately went to the police. Their neighbors were questioned. Private investigators were hired. They were doing everything they could to find out who this was. DNA was tested from the envelopes with no match. It was a woman, but there was still no match. But the identity of the Watcher still remained a void. You know, the family actually never moved in. I mean, they couldn't move in. How do you sleep in a room when you know someone is outside your window in the dark watching? This story bothers me like other people and most murder mysteries because it's unresolved. The narrative has no ending. Our minds hate unfinished business. We want to know the reveal. We want to know what happened. We want the Scooby-Doo moment where the mask is finally pulled off. Without that reveal, all these stories continue to stay alive in our brains. You start imagining, oh, who is it? Who could it be? Was it the neighbor living right next door? Was it the previous owner? Or was it a hoax? When a story doesn't have an ending, your brain tries to write one for you. And usually, the version that we write in our head is much scarier than the truth. Which now brings me to a confession. I'm going to admit something to you right now, and I'm curious if you'll admit it to yourself. I'm afraid of the dark. You heard me. I'm a grown-ass man. I've lived through the DC snipers and personal tragedies, personal struggles. Yet, if I'm in a house all alone and the power goes out, my heart rate skyrockets through the roof. Why? Because darkness is my boogeyman. When your eyes can't see in the corner of the room, my brain says to me, I can't confirm there isn't a threat over there. And when the brain can't have a definitive conclusion, imagination fills that gap. Now, this isn't a weakness, it's just a survival instinct. Humans have been reacting like this forever. We don't fear the dark. We fear what we can't see in the dark. We fear the loss of control. And this is why horror movies are so effing effective. Horror movies play with that dark void. They actually show us just enough to trigger the what if, but not enough for us to relax and sit back. That's why the movie The Strangers, in my opinion, is one of the most psychologically violent films. If you haven't seen it, the premise, it's very simple. A couple is staying at a remote family vacation home. And yes, this is based on a true story, at least the first one. A knock at the door comes in the middle of the night. It's just a girl standing back in the shadows with her face obscured so you can't see who it is. She asks one thing: is Tamara home? The couple says no. The girl leaves. But she comes back with the other strangers. All of them were wearing masks. Not, I wouldn't say monster scary, but simple plastic creepy faces. I mean, they would scare me. They didn't ask for money. They didn't want to talk. They just wanted to terrorize. At the end of the movie, one of the victims asks the most haunting question: why are you doing this to us? And the masked woman says 4 chilling words: because you are home. That line is a calculated phrase against our sense of controlled fear. It tells us there is no why, there is no motive to understand, there is no pattern to solve. It only suggests that violence can be purely random, and random violence removes the structure and the control we use to feel safe. And when structure disappears, our fear just grows. It multiplies. We watch movies on purpose like that, I think, on some level, just to test ourselves, test our limits. I think we're asking ourselves, if the world stopped making sense, would I survive? But we can't live in the state of the strangers forever. We definitely need our palate cleansed. We need to believe that order can be restored. This is where the competence porn genre comes in. I said porn. And you see how I actually used the correct word? Think about Jack Reacher. Think about Jack Ryan. Don't worry, I'm going to tie it together. I have spent many, many hours with these characters, reading the books, watching the shows, watching the movies. And then I remember also discovering Harlan Coben, and I got his book, Tell No One, on audiobooks. Listening to it, it allowed me to build that movie in my head. I could see the actual sweat on the brow of the primary character. I could feel the tension of every moment. But what makes Reacher or Ryan so satisfying isn't just the action. It's their competence. Man, I came out wrong. They're competent. They can walk into any chaotic scene, a corrupt town, a terrorist plot, a missing person, and they apply logic. They see the patterns that no one else sees or everybody else is missing. They are the human embodiment of controlled fear. When I watch a character like Jack Reacher dismantle a group of bad guys, I'm not just cheering for him to win. I'm actually cheering for the idea that a single person can walk into the dark and turn the lights back on. I am reassuring my brain that even in a world of crap, there are people still capable of fixing it. You know, we want to believe that someone somewhere is still in control. But then a story like The Purge comes along and asks a much darker question. For those who don't know, the premise is that once a year for 24 hours, all crime, including murder, is legal. No police, there's no hospitals, no consequences. It's a thought experiment wrapped up into a thriller. It removes the legal and social structure from society, which forces us to look into the mirror and ask ourselves, what actually keeps people from harming each other? Is it because we are good? Or is it because there's a system of controlled fear that keeps us in line? When you watch The Purge, you aren't just scared of the people in the masks. You're scared of the person behind the mask because you don't know them. You're scared that the ordinary neighbor, the one who looks like John List, is only ordinary because the rules say he has to be. Crazy, right? It makes me wonder, how safe is our suburban life? Or is it just a polite agreement that could be revoked at any time? So, why do we do it? Why do we listen to these stories before we go to bed? Why do we obsess over the details of a 50-year-old murder in Westfield? Maybe it's because we aren't actually fascinated by the violence. Maybe we're fascinated by the anatomy of it. We want to know where it started. We want to see the cracks in the foundation before the house falls down. Because if we can understand why John List did what he did, if we can blame it on his upbringing, his finances, or his warped religious views, then we can convince ourselves that it won't happen to us. I don't think he was different because of his specific circumstances or his upbringing. By understanding the why, it actually helps us regain control. We can actually put the monster in the cage and lock the door. We begin to relax because the mystery has been solved. The threat has been neutralized. It's that release. It's the sigh of relief when the credits roll or the last chapter ends. That is controlled fear. Let me say this. When I think back to where I grew up in Westfield, all those beautiful homes, all the neighbors mowing their lawns, I begin to realize that what stayed with me about John List wasn't the brutality of his crime. It was the question, how? How does a human being choose to become evil? How does a father look at his children as obstacles? The moment we start asking those questions, we aren't just being nosy. We're just trying to understand the human soul. We're trying to map out the dark. We're trying to make sure we don't accidentally walk into it. Understanding fear is how the brain regains footing in an unstable world. And maybe that's why these types of stories hook us. And it's not because we love the darkness, but because we are all in our own way trying to find that light switch. We want the world to make sense again. We want to know that even if there's a watcher in the shadows, there's a way to see him. And as long as we keep telling these stories, we keep the control. Thanks for listening to All About the Biscuits. What you should do, be curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the things you fear are often just the stories you haven't finished writing yet.
Thanks for pulling up a chair with us at All About the Biscuits. Remember, life's messy, flaky, and sometimes sweet, but we're in it together. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, leave a review, and pass the plate to a friend. See you next time.